Good morning, everyone. This is another episode of the Canadian Immigration Live Q&A. I am joined today by Alicia Bachman-Bihari, a Canadian immigration lawyer here in our immigration law firm, Holthe Immigration Law. Alicia, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Igor. Thank you for hosting today. And Igor also is our newest Canadian immigration lawyer at the firm, and he's been with us for more years as somebody helping in every aspect of the firm as well. So Igor is now one of us, and we're very glad for Igor's technical expertise and ability to make things happen, and all of the all of the things that happen in the background that make it all go. So that's fantastic. And now Igor is also meeting with clients. So it's a lovely way to expand knowledge areas. And so thank you, Igor, for hosting today.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so Alicia, while we're waiting for people to call in, wanted to remind everyone that we love to see where you're tuning in from. So let us know the city and country, if possible, where you watch this live Q&A. For those people who want to share a little bit more about themselves, we also would love to see that. Let us know if you received an ITA, you're waiting for the ITA, maybe there are specific issues that you have right now and you just want to share your pain with us and let us know exactly at what stage of the immigration process you are, because we know there are a lot of changes that happened in October, and those changes are not positive. And for those people who just tune in and maybe it's your first time watching this live Q&A, just wanted to let you know we do this every Wednesday at 10 a.m. So it's a TV show that never ends. We would do it every single week. Um, like right now, we even started titling our episodes. So Alicia, can you believe it? It's 439th episode of the Canadian Immigration Live Q&A. It's more than days in a year. So if we were doing this every single day, it would take us a year and a half just to get to this stage. So 10 a.m. every Wednesday, you can connect and ask your questions, and we love to interact with our viewers and subscribers. All right, Alicia. So I'm gonna go through the comments right now. So we have the first comment from Philippines. Miss P says hello, and then we have a subscriber that I see consistently joining our live Q&As. So Aloha Toby says, great to have Alicia and Igor today. Thanks for consistency with this weekly Q&A. Gained and learned a lot from it. And hello from Calgary. Perfect. And then we have Karan from New York. Oh, I used to live in New York. Nice. Nice to see you, Karan. We have Vinny from UK. And then let's see. Do we have someone else? Oh yeah, we have people originally from Nigeria, but now in Mauritius. Calgary, Toronto. So good presence, good presence. All right, so without any further delay, Alicia, let's go to the questions. I'm going to open the first one that we've got in the chat. So for hospitality stream eligibility, will the AAIP validate 40 hours a week? So 5 months for 800 hours. Okay, so 800 hours in 5 months. As the minimum required is 30 hours. So 6 months and 780 hours of work.
And so, Igor, I don't know if you're able to share the screen, but maybe you can pop over to the AAIP website and we'll just walk you through how eligibility assessments work with AAIP. And this is really important. So one thing I wanted to add to Igor's preface about how this works is Igor and I are both Canadian immigration lawyers, and this channel is here to give people immigration information. We are doing our best to share information that's going to be pivotal and make a difference when you guys are thinking about what your options are for immigration. We are lawyers, but we cannot give you advice through this live stream. If you want advice, we are happy to speak with you. Make sure to book a consultation. We have to validate who you are because it's a Law Society requirement, and we need to make sure that we're being professional and getting enough information in order to properly give you advice. So information here. If you need advice, slide over to our website, Holthe Immigration Law, book a consult. So in general, though, we can give you advice about where to look for this information. So Igor, I think, was
Yeah.
sliding over to AAIP, and he went to the tourism and hospitality stream. And then if you click eligibility, then you'll scroll down here. There's a bunch of employer requirements. So what does your employer need to meet to be able to fit within this stream? What kind of occupations are eligible in terms of the NOC codes, what the language requirements are, and what the education requirements are. And so when you're looking at this, this is where if you scroll down, it's kind of about halfway through the page, it says job offer or employment um, contract and work experience. And so here's where it says for a minimum of 6 consecutive months or minimum of 780 hours the time you apply. And so this is dependent upon whether you're looking at the time your application is submitted and at the time the AAIP assesses your application. So those are two different time periods. So be careful that when you submit your expression of interest and when they assess that application, that you also have that 30 hours with an approved tourism and hospitality employer in one of the eligible occupations for a minimum of 6 consecutive months. And then it does say, or a minimum of 780 hours the time you apply. And so I agree with you that this is not super clear. It does also say in the job offer or employment contract section, you must have 6 consecutive months, at least 780 hours of work experience with your current employer. And so if the question was, can you have more hours but not quite hit the 6-month mark, that's always a dangerous kind of proposition because most of the time when they say that you have to have the 6 months, they mean that you have to have the equivalent of 6 months of work. And if you have, only 5 months, but you've met the hours requirement, that to me would be a little bit dicey because you want to make sure you're also hitting that 6-month requirement. So I agree with you. It's a little bit unclear in how they word that because they said 6 consecutive months and then they have in brackets or a minimum of 780 hours. I think it's much safer to wait until you for sure have those 6 months. Um, and just keeping in mind that you could try to contact AAIP and get clarification on that point because I agree with you, it's not worded very well on their website.
Yeah. And Alicia, I keep thinking about the analogy with express entry. Like,
Hmm.
if you work more than 30 hours a week, you cannot calculate those hours on top of the 30, which is a max that you can include in your calculation. So I know some people are really hardcore, they work like 60 hours a week. And
Hmm.
it doesn't mean that they can accumulate 1 year of work experience in less months and like half a year.
Right.
So I would suspect that similar logic applies in here. Like, if even if you work, let's say 60, doesn't mean um, you can meet the eligibility requirement in like half the time.
That's right. Yeah. And so you're right, Igor, for express entry for sure. It doesn't matter if you're working 60 hours a week, you still have to meet those numbers of weeks, so 52 weeks. Um, AAIP is a little bit confusing in the way that they list that on the website, but I would
Mm.
say to be safe, make sure that you're hitting that 6-month mark in terms of how many months have you or weeks within the month have you worked.
All right, so let's move on to the next question. So I would not risk trying to pronounce the first name of the subscriber. I'm sorry for that. I just don't want to say something that is incorrect. But the question is actually really good. Though I probably would clarify the question a little bit. When applying for postgrad work permit, does spouse need to have a language test? Um, so my understanding is when the principal applicant, the student who just completed the program, applies for the postgrad work permit, like the way the question is phrased right now, does the spouse of the student need to have a language test so that the student can get a postgrad work permit? If that's what you wanted to ask, then it's one question. If let's say you wanted to say, if a spouse of a postgrad work permit holder wants to apply for the work permit, thus the spouse needs a language test, that would be a different question. So Alicia, how do you understand this question?
Yeah, so maybe Igor, what we'll do is we'll slide on over, and this is a very complex area that is becoming more complex because they said they're going to change it. And people now really need to try to get their spousal open work permit applications in if you're currently eligible, because this may go away. And so, Igor, if you slide over to open work permits for family members of foreign workers, this is where it's going to give people the information that hopefully they're seeking. And so there's a number of different categories of different types of work permits for the principal applicant. And so some people are here on IEC work permits, some people are here on open postgrad work permits, some people are applying for their first open postgrad work permit, and some people, the principal applicant already has the PGWP, and then the spouse wants to come join them or extend their status. So there are different scenarios that could apply here, but this is exactly where we're at. And if you see at the very top in the bar there, it says upcoming changes to temporary residence programs. And this is the September 18th announcements is where it's going to link us. And it's going to say in one of those bullet points, limiting work eligibility later this year to spouses of foreign workers in management or professional occupations, thanks, Igor, it's so small, or in sectors with labor shortages under Canada's work permit program. So this is now going to apply to both the temporary foreign worker program, which is linked with an LMIA, or to the international mobility programs, which is a big umbrella. It includes things like IEC, it includes Mobilité Francophone, it includes other free trade agreement work permits. So we know that changes are coming, that very few people are going to be eligible for open spousal work permits if they are a spouse of a temporary foreign worker under any of the programs soon. We don't know when. So right now, people can still apply. So if you go back to that other page, Igor, it's going to break it down by a few different categories. So if it says, if you go to next, how do you apply? Down at the next page, it says high skilled workers. So they've broken this down to requirements based on whether the principal applicant is in a high skilled job or a low skilled job. And then they've also broken this down. You can expand all these little arrows into what the principal foreign worker requirements are and what the family member requirements are. And so this is really going to depend on which category. So if you are applying for a new postgrad work permit and you want your spouse to be able to work, it's important that you can show that you will be working. The principal applicant will be working in a high skilled or low skilled job and meet the requirements of the current program. And the tricky part is if you've just graduated from school and you don't yet have a job, you can apply, the principal applicant can apply for the postgrad work permit. But if you don't have a job yet, your spouse is not eligible to apply unless and until you get a job. And so I've had a few consults with people who the pressure is on. They're trying to figure out, well, who do we accept a job offer from? How do we find a job as soon as possible before the spouse's open spousal work permit that was linked to the study permit is going to expire? And before, hopefully before IRCC completely changes the rules on this. So it is a tricky situation for sure, but this is where you would go to work through this decision tree to figure out if your spouse is eligible to apply.
Okay, perfect. Alicia, let's move on to the next question. Oh, Isabella says I have a very good sunglasses. Not sunglasses, but eyeglasses. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we have a lot of questions. I lost track where I left off. Okay, let's see. Somehow the biometric and medical letters came in fast after express entry. Hopefully everything goes well. For Vinny. Vinny, I had a client. It's an interesting timeline, Alicia. So the client had a refusal on their express entry application because they chose the wrong NOC code. So we started working on their second application. We've submitted the application. less than a week after we send it off to IRCC, we've got an additional documents request, which was like absolutely ridiculous. The officer gave only 7 days and asked for the information that is just like, I still don't understand this request. But regardless, we send the response to the request, and then in 3 weeks they've got approval of their expert entry application. So like maybe like a month and a week to process the whole expert entry application, and everything was like boom, 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 never stopping process. It is possible. Like we see some applications taking months and months, but some applications are getting approved really fast. So it is possible that it will go fast for you. We have a question from Grace. What is the chance of having a visitor record to apply for a work permit inside Canada?
Okay, so
Okay.
Grace,
Okay.
one thing I want to highlight, and maybe Igor, you can go and
Yeah.
find this news update, but it used to be the law has always been that if you are a visitor, so if your status is visitor status within Canada, you're here on an electronic travel authorization, or you're here on, you got a visitor visa and you have a valid temporary resident visa and visitor status in Canada, that you could not apply as a visitor from inside Canada for a work permit. That has always been the law. During COVID, there were some temporary public policies that relaxed that law that said, oh, you know what? A lot of people are stuck in Canada and they can't leave. As visitors, we're going to allow them to switch to a work permit if they could find an employer who gave them an offer of employment under the IMP, or if they had an LMIA, if the employer got an LMIA, then they could apply for a work permit. That has stopped. So it is no longer possible to apply to change your status from visitor to a worker from inside Canada. So just be super, super careful about this. The other thing is that if you try to come to Canada as a visitor and you say, my intent's to visit, I want to go see Banff, I want to go travel the Rocky Mountains, and I want to come for 2 weeks. If you say that and you prove your temporary intent and you come here, and then instead of just going to see Banff and traveling around the Rocky Mountains for 2 weeks, if you try to do an application to change conditions and now apply for a work permit, it's possible that IRCC, an officer, could say, hey, wait a minute, that's misrepresentation. You told us you were coming as a tourist to go visit the Rockies, and instead you're turning around and filing a work permit application. So A, you can't do it anymore, and B, it could be a ground for misrepresentation. So no, you are not allowed to apply for a visitor record and then turn around and apply for a work permit. If you want to apply for a work permit, do that from outside Canada. So submit your application for that work permit from outside Canada. Make sure that your employer is eligible to hire you. So either they have a labor market impact assessment, or maybe you fit under a free trade agreement as a professional or a technician, or maybe you've learned French and you have your NCLC level 5s right now for all 4 categories: speaking, reading, listening, and writing in a French exam, TEF or TCF. And if your employer in Canada submits what's called an employer portal offer through the offer of employment, they get an A number and they will send that A number to you, then you can apply from outside Canada to come to Canada to work in any province for that employer other than the province of Quebec. So just make sure that if you want to apply for a work permit, you're doing so from outside of Canada.
Okay. Alicia, we have a really cool question. So first, Shane works for Arc'teryx, one of my favorite brands, on top of Lemon. And it's a Canadian brand, for those of you unaware. So Shane is working in Vancouver as a junior designer. And so Shane is wondering, what is a good score to qualify for expert entry? Alicia, what would be the number that you would
Yeah,
think?
so maybe Igor. And what we normally do is we normally check in with the express entry rounds of invitations. So we'll do it. We'll go over there and we'll take a look. And it's always helpful to see where things are at. And so if you take a look at that top bar, it shows where the last round of invitations were. So the last round of invitations was last week. There were 1,800 lucky people that were invited to apply with an ITA. And keep in mind, this was a trade occupation. So good because we've not had a category-specific trade occupation. I did have a consult with somebody. It's a little bit confusing because there are 3 federal categories. One is CEC, one is federal skilled worker, and the other is federal skilled trades. Those are the federal categories. This was not a federal skilled trade draw. What it was a CEC draw with a category specific 6 months of work experience in a trade occupation. Or I guess theoretically, maybe you could apply, maybe it would also categorize under people who had FST or FSW who also had the 6 months within Canada. So the way that these category specific draws work is that if you meet one of the overall 3 program eligibility minimum requirements, and you've got 6 months of work experience within one of those NOT codes, so Igor is pulling up how you choose category specific, and you go to the trades one rather than healthcare, Igor. Yeah. So if you go to the trades, then it says you must have had in the last 3 years, 6 months full-time continuous work experience or part-time work experience that adds up to 6 months in Canada or abroad in a single occupation listed in the table below. And so this is where only these NOT codes are getting picked. It's a very short list for the trade occupations. It's a targeted draw. So only if you meet program eligibility requirements for one of those top 3 and you have 6 months of experience within the last 3 years could you be eligible for this draw. But it's not just a federal skilled trades specific draw. So this is how it's working. It's a little bit of meeting minimum criteria and being able to fit a category. So that's what was just drawn. And you'll see that the minimum CRS for this was really low. It was 433. And the reason it was so low was because of all those things I was just talking about, that only a few people are going to be able to show that they had NOC experience within a trades category. Only these 10 NOCs were eligible, and they have 6 months of experience within the last 3 years in Canada or abroad. If we look historically at the other draws, we'll see what kind of most people would need to hit. And so on a general draw for Canadian experience class, now we see that 539, right? That is where the CRS is sitting if you don't have a category specific occupation work experience of at least 6 months within the 3 years. If you just work in any job that's high skilled, so make sure you're in tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, then you've got to be hitting 539 points right now. And that is super, super high. And of course, we know that IRCC just released the levels plan last week. It was a little bit of a bombshell because instead of keeping the levels of permanent residents on the same trajectory that they had planned for, they normally have levels plans that are rolling 3-year plans. They're reducing the overall number of permanent residents that they will process into Canada for 2025 by 105,000 people. And so instead of hitting what we thought they were going to hit for targets, they are reducing that significantly. So basically, they're aiming for 0 population growth. They are really putting the brakes on immigration. And we know that this is the first level plan that also has restrictions on temporary residents. So in addition to reducing permanent residents, they're also implementing a whole bunch of measures, most of which have already been announced, some of which we're still waiting for the other foot to drop or the other ball to drop. And that's with like who's eligible for open spousal work permits. But we know there's been restrictions on students, there's caps for students, there's provincial attestation letters. It depends on how many are allocated across the provinces. There's restrictions in terms of who can apply for LMIAs right now. Like that is a huge, huge change for employers. There's refusals to process on low wage LMIAs if the census metropolitan area has a high unemployment rate, higher than 6%. No LMIAs, no low wage LMIAs, period. Even for people who are out of CMAs so they have relatively low unemployment, then there's still a cap. So employers are only eligible to have 10% generally of their workforce as a temporary foreign worker. Then they've also changed the high wage LMIAs. And so it is really, really tough for people. If you are running out of time, your work permit's about to expire, and you were hoping that your employer would get an LMIA under high wage, what they announced last week, or maybe a little bit over a week ago, was that there is now an artificial 20% bump on the median wage rate. So in Alberta, for example, 29.50 is the median wage rate, and that would be the high between the high and the low wage. But now they've said there's going to be a 20% uplift on that. And so if your employer wants to try to file an LMIA under high wage, they've got to be paying you over $35.40 as a very minimum. So difficult times, make sure your CRS is as high as possible.
Yeah, and Alicia, I put a comment from another Alicia who was just wondering about the minimum wage. And so as you were answering, I thought that was relevant question as well. As we speak about the CRS scores, and we have another question from Kiran. His current CRS score is 471. Is learning French a good option for increasing the CRS? And how long do you think the French draws will last? Good question.
Yeah. And so, Karan, the interesting thing, the only kind of spot of good news in the levels plan was that for people who are French speakers, for people who are bilingual and who have strong French scores, that should continue. And the reason that that should continue is because we can see in the levels plan that the percentage of Francophone population that they are aiming to have settle outside the province of Quebec is going up. That number is a higher percentage of the number of immigrants that they're allowing in. And so that to me says category-based French draws will continue because it's the lever that they have to make sure that they are bringing in enough French-speaking express entry applicants. And so, yeah, if you have French, then you're still eligible for those bonus points for French if you're hitting your NCLC level 7s. So making sure that you are studying, that you're doing the best you can on the TCF or the TEF exams, because it seems like category-based French draws will continue and there's less competition there. Generally, those scores on your CRS are going to be, you've got a better chance at a 471 than you do for sure on a general draw. So hopefully, if you do know French and you're able to get your NCLC level 7, that will boost your score even more. And hopefully you will have a chance if they do another French category-based draw, which they have been doing. They've been doing a number of them. We'll see if they continue. But as far as it seems from what they've said in the levels plan, that should also continue next year into 2025.
Yeah, and Karan, like with your score of 471, if you would qualify already for the French draw and your score did not improve by a single point, you would already have an ITA. Because if you look at the previous round of invitations for French category, the scores were 444, 446, 394, 400. So just the fact that you would qualify for the French category would just make you a good candidate for the ITA. And we've been talking about French for maybe the last 2 years now, if I'm not mistaken. I think it all started with Francophone mobility, and then different provinces would open different streams prioritizing French speakers. Like even if you look at Alberta Opportunity Stream, they specifically, before they introduced like this points-based system, they were saying, okay, if you speak French, we would consider you as one of the priorities in our draws. Even right now, as a bilingual, you get more points. Like right now in Alberta, you get more points if English is your first language and French is your second language. But still, French is always a good option to pursue. I remember before even myself and my wife, we immigrated to Canada. Everything was really uncertain with our application, to say the least. And so we started studying French in New York City after long hours of work, and I've been doing all different kind of jobs. Even at that time, French was already a game changer, and right now it's even more important than ever. Alicia, we have a question from Marissa. Is a citizenship application easy compared to a PR application?
Um,
I can
well,
comment on this one.
go ahead, Igor.
Yeah, so Marissa, it is easier. I'll tell you this, but it's not easy. In terms of what, if I would say it's easy, that means that it's very hard to make a mistake that would result in refusal and problems down the road. But it's actually easy to make a mistake, and when you submit your citizenship application, first you must understand the eligibility for citizenship. So many people don't appreciate the timing when they can actually apply. They think as soon as they hit 3 years from the date when they entered Canada, they can submit their application. Well, that's the thing, but with one caveat: you have to file taxes for 3 years. So let's say you um, immigrated, let's say um, in January 5th, on January 5th. Um, would you be eligible to apply on January 5th, 3 years after you landed? No, right? Because you haven't filed your taxes. So once you file your taxes for 3 years, then you can apply. And so this is just one example of how people can easily make a mistake. Another good mistake that people make all the time is unintentionally misrepresenting. So whatever you put in your immigration application becomes part of your record. And when you sign your application and transmit it to RCC, you say, I understand that whatever is in this application is part of my immigration record and will be used to assess my future applications. So if, let's say, you put one information in your PR application and then you forget to mention this information, or you twist this information, or you present it in a different light, it might result in a whole set of problems. So that is another thing that you must double check. The residency requirement right now, it's not a big deal in terms of, like, it's not as complicated to calculate days you spent in Canada because it's done online. And if you apply online through the portal, it calculates the dates and it gives you the breakdown, how many days are excluded. Before that, it was a little more challenging because you had to use a calculator and print out the results and enter all of your dates, and that was an issue. Police certificates can become a little problematic, and so there are some things that you might want to keep in mind when you submit a citizenship application. So yes, it is easier. It's not as comprehensive, let's say, as a PR application. So you don't have to produce reference letters. You don't have to provide pay stubs and stuff. But it's still an immigration application that can get refused, and sometimes they get refused. Um, it's a little more challenging if you apply not for the grant of citizenship, switching from PR status to become a Canadian citizen, but when you apply for proof of citizenship, then there is a different document checklist. There are at least 5 different scenarios with 5 different checklists that you need to follow. Sometimes it's hard to prove that your parent is a Canadian citizen. Like, you have to go to archives, look for the documents, prove the timeline of the person. So in situations where you in doubt, I would advise not to take it lightly and not to submit something just for the sake of submitting it. And if you need help, always reach out for assistance to someone.
Mhm. And Igor, maybe we kind of skipped over Alicia's question, and I'll just
Okay, let's
pull
see.
out a few points from it. So Alicia Dio had said for job offers. And Alicia, the tricky part about your question is that there are job offers in a number of different contexts. And so she was saying, Igor, hi, for the job offer, should the salary be above the minimum wage?
Yeah, I'm
This
trying to
is for
find it.
PGWP holders, yeah, where the LMIA is not required, only job offer. Should the salary be on the high wage category? So the tricky thing about this, Alicia, is in what circumstance or how are you using this job offer? Are you talking about a job offer where you're claiming arranged employment points under Express Entry? Or are you talking about a job offer in order to meet eligibility for one of the PNP programs? And so this is why, um, it's not possible for us to give advice, but we will give you some information. And some of that information is maybe, Igor, you can pull up my blog article on can you claim job offer points in your Express Entry profile under arranged employment. And so, Alicia, if you're looking at Federal Express Entry, you can only claim job offer arranged employment points and get those 50 points on your Express Entry profile if you actually have an employer specific work permit. So when you look at your work permit, it actually has the name of your employer on it. And it could be that they applied for a new LMIA, it could be you're on an existing LMIA with work permit, or it could be that you're under one of the programs that's LMIA exempt but employer specific. So like the IMP Mobilité Francophone, for example, or an intercompany transfer. So only if you're on an employer-specific work permit would you ever be eligible for arranged employment points with a job offer. However, some people are talking about job offers in the context of not Federal Express Entry, but they're talking about job offers in the context of the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program or one of the other PNP programs, where in order to be eligible for the stream, you have to have a job offer. And depending on the province and depending on the stream, there are very specific requirements for how that job offer wage needs to look. And so in Alberta, we know that they actually use the ALIS wages. So they're not even using Job Bank, they're using a different wage band that's in a provincial statistical database. And so be super careful if you are looking at one of the PNPs and you're looking at job offers, go very specifically to the PNP job offer requirements section.
Alicia, as the time runs out, um, I propose that we skip the line of questions and go straight to the super chats. So we've got 3 super chats. So Yiting says, question regarding in Canada work experience for CC. Does work experience gained on a fixed term contract qualify for CC, or it must be permanent?
Mm-hmm. So eating for CEC, they basically say as long as you are employed. And so you cannot claim self-employment for CEC Canadian high skilled work experience. But if you are employed, whether it's a fixed term or a term contract that has a specific end date, or whether it's at will, also known as permanent, which is basically they just have to follow employment standards codes before you could be let go. Either of those situations should normally qualify as an employment arrangement as long as you are viewed as an employee. And this can become a little bit complex depending on, you know, whether you have any ownership stakes in the company, whether you're getting paid by dividends, or whether you're getting any sort of other commission or other benefits that are not just a salary. So as long as you are viewed as an employee, you have an employer who's a Canadian company who is in control of your operations, directing your work, they have the tools, you report to a place of business, and you're getting salary that has been documented with pay stubs, your company's properly doing their withholding, and it's showing up in your Canadian tax documents and their payroll returns, then that should be something that you should be eligible to claim for Canadian work experience as long as it is in a high skilled knock. So be careful that you are looking to characterize the job duties, and it's less about the title and more about the meat and potatoes of what you're doing. And so you look at the lead statement for that knock and the majority or the substantial number of the bulleted duties and making sure you're choosing something that is within tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, and that you're on the same page with your employer, that that is what they believe that you are doing, because you need to get letters of reference from your employer to confirm what your job has been.
Okay, yeah. And Alicia, it's also probably important to add here, when you look at the Express Entry completeness check, they have specific requirements as to the documents that you must provide for Canadian work experience. Maybe I can pull it up.
Mm-hmm.
Entry
Yeah.
completeness check.
Exactly. And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'll just upload the contract that I signed when I originally got hired. But often companies don't have contracts that actually talk about what your job duties are in specific detail. And so, exactly, you can go here, you can pull up what is the proof of experience or reference letters from your employer. It's got to be on letterhead, it's got to have all sorts of indication with who is writing that letter, their contact information, address, email, and then exactly what you're doing, what your duties and responsibilities are, dates you've worked, number of hours per week that you've worked, what your annual salary is plus benefits. So they want to know what your benefits are. And then if you have that Canadian work experience, just like Igor highlighted, you can also provide your T4 tax information. So the company at the end of the year has to provide you, every employee, T4 information showing here's the total amount of Canadian dollars you have earned at our company. And also, then you would have a notice of assessment that you file with CRA, Canada Revenue Agency. And you also hopefully have pay slips to show that you have that salary that's connected to a certain number of hours per week.
Yeah, I wish they could add here in the parentheses that only for outside
Outside.
Canada work
Yeah.
experience, because right now it is confusing. So when people are
Mhm.
just learning about expert century, um, they may get confused by this line and think that they can count the self-employed work experience. All right, Alicia, we have another super chat, very interesting one. So I think I understand the question. Maybe it's a little confusing, but regardless. So I'm considering foreign work experience with 2 more years on of post-grad work permit left. What advice can you give me? Pros and cons. Does it count if I work remotely for a foreign company while staying in Canada? And so my understanding is this person wants to obtain Canadian work experience first and get a combination with foreign work experience to get extra points. And we had a video on our YouTube channel where we calculated how do your points actually change if you just have Canadian work experience, and how the points will improve significantly if you have a combination of a Canadian and foreign work experience. So I think Isabella is in this situation right now where she wants to improve her points by getting foreign work experience in addition to Canadian. So do you have any comments on this one, Alicia?
Mhm. Yeah, and Isabella, I would say please book a consult because this is becoming really very strategic. And so we would need to know more about what are your points? Where have you studied? Where have you had some Canadian work experience? Do you have foreign work experience? How many months or years of foreign work experience? What are your language scores? Do you have family members accompanying you? What are their language scores in education? To really try to figure out what your best options are. In general, it seems a shame to waste your Canadian work experience or to not use the time to get a high skilled Canadian job simply because the points are so high, and I think they will stay very, very high for over a year now with this reduction in the levels plan. And so hopefully or probably what will happen is that people will be able to use that Canadian work experience forward in time. So even if you're in the unfortunate situation of having come to Canada, studied in Canada, worked in Canada on a PGWP, if you can't get enough points to qualify for a PR category, some people will probably have to go home. Just like Igor was saying, get that year of foreign work experience if you don't already have that year of high skilled foreign work experience, and then hopefully still use that Canadian work experience. And the way that you look for your eligibility and your Canadian work experience is, has it been within the last 3 years? Is that the period of time that you had that Canadian work experience? And so the risk on burning up your Canadian work experience by doing foreign work right now is that if you can't get an ITA soon enough and you have to go back to your home country, and you look back at a 3-year window, they're going to see, do you have 1 year, so 52 weeks of high skilled Canadian work? And if you don't, then you won't be eligible anymore for CEC draws. And so that's kind of the risk, that's the trade off. The other thing to keep in mind that I tell people all the time is that you cannot claim two full time jobs at the same time. So for any given week, if you are working 30 hours in Canada and you're working 15 hours outside of Canada, you can't claim both at the same time. You have to pick one or the other. And so there's a lot of moving parts in terms of the strategies that you might use here. So I'd say reach out, book a consult, and we can give you some advice about what we think are your best options.
Yeah, and Alicia, we have one more question from Isabella. Um, so we had our first AAIP draw last week, and you probably is the best person in the whole of Canada um, to answer this question because you've attended the presentation with a breakdown of how the draw was conducted. So what can we learn from the results, and do you have any advice for the candidates in Alberta Opportunity Stream? Um, so what
And
would
the
you say?
accelerated tech, yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, we had a Canadian Bar Association presentation where officers from the AAIP came and spoke with lawyers in Alberta to talk about how they're doing the draws, how the system is going, what they've set up. And a few things are super important. One of them is that people hopefully should understand that anybody can create an expression of interest profile. There is nothing in the AAIP system that actually screens for eligibility to make sure that you are properly fitting one of the AAIP streams. So even though you have an EOI score, does not mean that you are hitting minimum eligibility for one of the programs. So first and foremost, make absolute sure you are hitting eligibility for one of the AAIP streams. Then you look at the expression of interest. Be super, super careful when you're doing your expression of interest to make sure that everything is correct and accurate. There are some things in the way that they word questions right now, like what is your highest level of education and was it completed in Canada, that is confusing. They still have to clarify that. I've asked the question, they're waiting to get back to me. But you don't want to be in a situation where you misrepresent something in your profile, because if you misrepresent something in your EOI profile, AAIP can ban you. They can ban you for 2 years, they can ban you for 5 years, and they share that information with the federal government. And that is very bad. So be super careful when you're creating your EOI to make sure you've cross-checked all your prior applications, your study permit application, your visitor permits, your PGWP, your work permit applications. Make sure you understand how all those things are working together and that you don't have errors in those things. The next thing is if you are looking at an express entry linked system like the accelerated tech program, that's under express entry. So you have to make sure that you have a valid express entry profile that is going to be valid for more than 5 months. So that's one of the things it says on the website. So if your express entry profile is expiring in 3 months or 4 months, make sure that you go in and you take down the old one, do a new one right away so that you have a profile that's valid for longer than 5 months. So those are some of the key takeaways from that presentation. Make sure you're eligible, make sure there's no misrep, make sure that your express entry federal profile is going to be valid if you're looking for AAIP express entry or AAIP express entry with the accelerated tech subcategory.
And Alicia, like, question for myself then. Knowing how the express entry rounds of invitations work and the overall trajectory and the selection points and the selection factors, do you think express entry is more predictable than Alberta Opportunity Stream draws?
Mm-hmm.
And how would you see Alberta Opportunity Stream or AIP draws change like to become a little more predictive?
Mm. Well, Alberta's never wanted to pin themselves down. Alberta's always said, you know what, first you've got to meet minimum eligibility. Second, you have to have a high enough EOI score. But the third factor is when they do a draw, they can put in whatever parameters they want because they said right now there's over 20,000 people in the EOI pool, and some of those are not even eligible. But they want to narrow that down to smaller and smaller numbers because there are not very many nomination spots left. Basically, there are basically no nomination spots for this year left, but they do rolling invitations because this will move over, the processing will move over into next year. So they can still choose whatever parameters they want to try to make that expression of interest pool as small as possible. And so as an applicant, you can't influence that. All you can do is make sure that you have a legitimate profile that meets the criteria, that is honest, and there's no misrep. But just because you have a certain EOI score doesn't mean that you're guaranteed a nomination at all. Whereas with Express Entry, if you're hitting a CRS score and you're sure that you meet minimum eligibility, then if there's a draw and you qualify, that's something that's going to come through for you. So still, putting your eggs in the basket of Express Entry is going to be more predictable. If you have a chance at one of the PNPs, great, for sure. There's no reason not to try to pursue it, but just make sure you're accurate.
Yeah, because I keep thinking about people who, let's say right now, they have an employer who's willing to give them the employer attestation and declaration form.
Mhm.
They might wait in the expression of interest pool for like 6 months and
Mhm.
still not get an invitation. And there are so many risks that the employer can change, the manager can change. Um, you will lose your job, let's say, because of whatever happens, right? Like an injury, or like your relationship go bad, with your employer. There are so many things that would keep people really um, in this very dependent, vulnerable position compared um, to other employees working for the company in, let's say, PR status. So like you actually have to hang in and just wait and just hope, with no possibility to predict the likelihood of getting an invitation. Um, and that was one of the things that you've pointed out before. They rolled out the expression of interest system, that when you apply for the Alberta Opportunity Stream, before they introduced the points, it still was just an expression of interest, essentially, and they were not required to process your application. So many things that don't really help people, but actually just give them a little anxiety if you understand how it works. Um, so yeah, Express Entry is still probably the best pathway, but the problem is not many people are eligible for it, and it becomes a little more challenging to qualify for it going forward. Alicia, I see we have a whole bunch of different super chats welling up, so I probably will shift gears. So Moya asks, do cousins count as family connections? So I think we have the question relates to, can you get points for your cousins if you apply for Express Entry? And the other way how you can see this question is family connections for the province, um, if you apply for the provincial nominee program. So, do you want to tackle this one?
Sure. So it really depends, exactly like Igor said, whether we're talking about Federal Express Entry or one of the PNP programs. And so if you look at Federal Express Entry, so Igor's pulled it up, um, brother or sister, that's it, living in Canada, who is a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. So this is federally, this is under Express Entry.
And
It is
Alicia, this is the
literally,
CRS. So,
yeah,
so there's a difference. CRS
yeah,
and other points.
correct. So if you are looking under,
Those are the FSW points.
you've moved to
So the
FSW. Okay.
eligibility.
So if you're looking at federal skilled worker points, so there's a minimum score of 67 points on the points grid that you have to meet in order to meet minimum eligibility only under FSW. This doesn't apply for CEC. But if you're under FSW, then you need to make sure that you're hitting at least a minimum of 67 points. And this is where Igor is pulling up where you could get 5 points for relatives in Canada. Keep in mind, you have to meet minimum eligibility for either federal skilled worker, federal skilled trades, or CEC. So under federal skilled worker, you could get some points, 5 points, if you actually have a relative living in Canada and you or your spouse has somebody who is your spouse's sibling, you or your spouse's aunt or uncle, you or your spouse's niece or nephew. So those are the only people that are going to give you points. So cousin is not on here.
Yeah.
Um, if you're looking under CEC for CRS points, again, you're not going to get points for cousin under CEC under the CRS. So the only way that sometimes cousins might be helpful in terms of family relationship is when you're looking under provincial nominee programs. Some of the PNPs will give additional consideration, or it's kind of a positive factor that they consider when you look at family members in Canada. And it really depends on that specific PNP to see how far out they look and will cousins be possible to show that connection to the province or not, and often they are.
Yeah, and Alicia, I cannot help but also add here that when you submit your EAPR, right? So there is the button that says
Mhm.
calculate your score, right? So at the bottom. So when you complete, you can double check, like, do you have the same CRS as the CRS um, for before you received an ITA? Like, did you enter all of the information to account for every entry, right? So many people would get points, like 15 CRS points for brothers and sisters, and they would think that this is enough. Well, when the officer assesses your application after you submit the EAPR, they don't just assess whether you have the exact matching CRS score. They also assess whether you're actually eligible for it, for the program. So the CRS is one thing, so you have to prove your relationship with your brother and sister. But if you got 5 points for the FSW score grid, and you had 5 points, let's say, because you had your spouse's aunt or uncle, you also want to include proof that your spouse has an uncle or aunt in Canada along with your EAPR, because the officer will first assess whether you are eligible in fact for the program. Did you legitimately get 67 points? And then the officer will see, okay, did you were you eligible to get the 15 CRS points for brother and sister in Canada? So make sure that you don't just focus on brothers and sisters when you submit the EAPR, but also you submit enough proof to show that you legitimately got 67 FSW points if you qualify for FSW program. I know many people come to us and say, like, do I have just to prove 3 years of work experience? And it's hard to answer this question also because if you got 67 points with more than 3 years of work experience and you would not score 67 with just 3 years, then you have to prove more than three. So that is one of the catches that many people miss. So it's very important. It's not directly related to Cousin's question, but it's something that I think is very important as well to mention, because for many people that might result in refusals. All right, let's move on. Alicia, this one is another super chat. I still have two more super chats to go after Miss R. So Miss R says, when an outland spousal sponsorship application is returned as incomplete, can they upload updated forms through the same returned application, or they have to create a new one?
And Miss R, this is a tricky question, and it really depends on what's happened in your portal. And so book a consult, because if your application was returned as incomplete, they would have sent you kind of a highlighted information saying, here's what's missing. And then they would normally send you instructions on how to resubmit your application. It is always best when you resubmit to make sure everything is up to date, that there's no stale dated forms, that all your supporting documentation and all of the form versions. So when you do a spousal sponsorship application, some of those are online forms, and you want to make sure they're up to date and there's nothing that's really old, right? If it took them 4 months or something to say that this is incomplete, you want to make sure your address is still correct, your employment information, everything else is still up to date. But on those paper forms, so there's a couple paper forms, right? The 1344 and then the other eligibility to sponsor form, those are PDF forms that you now have to re-upload. You will want to make sure that the version of those forms is up to date as well. And so, depending on what they've told you and how they've told you to respond, you might be able to try to fix things and update things in the portal where you did that application. But you might not be able to. They might not have allowed you to have a spot to do so. So, you know, book a consult, it would require me taking a look at what you've put in your application and exactly how they instructed you.
Yeah. All right. And as we have to wrap up, one last super chat. And so it was split in two different questions. So I'm going to pull them one by one. So Quell says, I'm running a startup in BC and have only one contractor from abroad. The company is already generating over 500K. Received a placement for the startup visa with priority processing. And then the second part of the question, after the recent changes, I'm considering giving up on the application before starting. So any advice that we can give, Alicia, in here, or we need to collect more information?
Yeah, so Quell, this is, normally Mark has the little bell and we ring the little bell because this is for sure an advice question. This is not general information.
Yeah.
And we would never want to tell somebody, withdraw your application without having a really in-depth conversation about why did they file that application? What are you concerned about? If the reason that you're concerned or you think that there's misrepresentation in that application, for sure that's something you will need to fix. If it's just that you've gotten cold feet or you're looking at a different program or maybe you have high CRS scores and you're going to do express entry instead, there's a whole other world of things that could happen there. But I'm not sure why you would want to just quit an application that's already in process, especially because they're really not processing new startup visa applications. It's very narrow in terms of the designated organizations that they would even allow people to work with. And each of those organizations has a cap on how many people they can support through the startup visa. So it's really, really narrowed now. So it's kind of like having a golden ticket if you already got your foot in the door on the startup visa program. Um, it might be longer processing times, but basically those doors are slammed shut for new applicants. So you really want to be sure if you're going to withdraw that application because it'll be very, very hard to ever try to file a new one.
Yeah. And one last thing before we drop off, wanted to remind everyone that if you need personalized immigration advice, you can go to our holthelaw.com website and book a consultation right in here. And you can select with whom you want to have a consult. We can select the duration of the consult. You can see the availability, and then you select the time and date. You can change the time zones. So very convenient. And we would be happy to chat with you about your specific immigration application. And then one last thing that I wanted to mention is that we have revamped our Canadian immigration newsletter. So right now you can subscribe to our newsletter, and you will receive very timely updates, I would say. Like, we try not to send emails every 2 weeks now, because sometimes by the time the 2 weeks mark passes, it's already too late to act. So we try to send you updates as soon as they become known. So that is the new thing. You can also go to our Canadian Immigration Institute website. So there you can find our courses. So right now we have 2 active courses, the Express Entry Masterclass and Accelerator, and we have a new TRV course. So for the Express Entry Accelerator, let me just click in here. Okay. So we do have bi-weekly masterclass sessions. So Mark connects with subscribers of the Express Entry course. So the next masterclass will start actually just in a little under 5 hours from now. And it's a one-on-one conversation. Not a one-on-one, it's like a group-on-one conversation. Essentially, everyone can tune in their mic and ask the question. You connect with video, so it's kind of like meeting in a small room where you connect with Mark and he answers your toughest question about Express Entry. So please check that out as well. So again, the website is CanadianImmigrationInstitute.com. The link is in the description. And if you need help, you can also go to our holthelaw.com website. The link is also in the description. And Alicia, that will be it for today. I will be wrapping up. Thank you everyone for submitting the questions. I see we have 177 people right now joining from different platforms. And we'll see you next Wednesday at 10 a.m. again.